Are we live? It's always a fun part.
Yes.
All right. So we will call to order the December 7th, 2022 meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee 2 at 6:03 p.m. We'll round up. Quick review of the agenda before we get started tonight. After our public comment period, we have a lot of new business. We'll approve meeting minutes. We will recap discussion from the community forum as well as from the meeting with the school committee on the district-wide study and educational plan. We will review cost estimates that have been provided to us for the various project options at this stage. We will take a vote to select our short list of options for the feasibility study in more depth during the next stage. We will review the draft of the preliminary design report that has been provided to us, and we will vote to approve the submission of that preliminary design report to the MSBA. And then we will review our updated meeting schedule with some changes I think that have been made or being proposed to that. And we will hope to adjourn as close to 8 p.m. as possible. So, come on in.
You're good.
Good.
Oh, there's a spot.
Oh, yeah, look at that. I mean, if anybody else shows up,
Then we're done.
we're done. We got nothing. Okay, so speaking of anyone else showing up, this is our public comment portion, and it does not look like there is anyone here for public comment, but we will certainly entertain the opportunity to reopen that if anyone does arrive during the meeting. So the next item is approval of meeting minutes. So we have received a copy of the draft meeting minutes from the November 22nd, 2022 meeting. Are there any questions or edits to those meeting minutes? Okay. Hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the minutes of November 22nd.
I move the minutes of November 22nd as written, sir.
Okay, motion by Mike, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Tiffany. We've got no one joining virtually tonight, so we can vote normally. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous.
What does
So,
that end up being, 6?
Yes.
what's that?
How many of us
Six,
are there?
Oh, how many people? Yeah, 6.
I always forget
Six.
how many is
Yep.
actually the committee.
That's a great question because the number does tend to vary. So yes, 6.
Thank you.
The next item on the draft agenda was approval of invoices, but we don't have any invoices tonight. So we will skip right over that and move into a recap of the discussion from the community forum. And who am I turning this over to for that? You?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, it was last week, I guess, or November, right? November 30th, we had a community forum at the high school auditorium. We had participation both remotely and in person. And then it's been posted online, available on the YouTube channel via HCAM, so there's some supplemental hits that are coming there. We also had an open-ended survey. There was a lot of good questions there. We presented traffic was the first time we presented that in front of the broader forum. That was probably the most of the questions that came out of it. Presented the updated status of the options as well. And I thought overall it was a good, productive meeting with the general public.
Any other thoughts or comments from other people in attendance? I did pull up just before the meeting, there are 127 views on YouTube. So once again, what we're seeing is that people are not necessarily joining us live as frequently, but we are getting some good views after the fact. So hopefully we'll also see responses to that open-ended survey. It did seem like traffic, I agree, was the dominant topic of questions amongst the people that were in attendance. But I thought that we had some good answers to that, and our traffic engineer was really well prepared. So.
Right, we also had virtual questions come in during the meeting, and I think we also were recapping some of the surveys and data we've collected at that forum as well for the public to hear the turnaround of information that we got and then presenting it back out. So I thought that was valuable as well.
Is that survey still open for one more week? Was
Yeah,
it?
till next Tuesday, I think, the 13th.
December 13th. I
Yeah, it was open for two
Yeah.
straight weeks.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you.
so anybody at Washington Home can jump on.
Right.
And then bridging our next two agenda items at the school committee meeting last week following the forum. There was
I'll turn that over that side of the
an
table.
ask and an offer to provide an update on the forum, not necessarily even after it closes, but when is the next school committee meeting?
Tomorrow.
That might be tough to turn around.
Right.
But we can get we'll get some updated survey results
Maybe before
out to
next.
them before they're, probably not before tomorrow, but before the next school committee meeting. It's back to back.
We love it.
Okay.
Do it all the time.
Every week, John,
Every week
from
all
now
week.
until February.
Yep.
Okay, so there's a December 15th meeting?
When is Christmas?
Yes, there.
Okay, we could probably get updated feedback by December 15th, right, Bob?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
So, and then do we want to recap the school committee meeting itself, or?
I'm happy to. Chris, I don't know if you.
I didn't prepare any notes, but we presented the findings of the, it was a lot of mirrored the presentation that we made to the community, but it was more topical, presenting the results of the system-wide study and allowed the school committee to have some discussion about grade configuration. They asked a lot of good questions, and I think we're headed towards publishing the system-wide study in a draft form around the 22nd.
Wait a second, yeah.
December 22nd. So that will kick off the start of the deliberation 2 weeks later at the 5th,
Yep.
at January 5th. And then we're expected to have a discussion with the school committee for those 2 weeks, the 5th and the 12th, ultimately ending up with a decision on the 19th, where we hope to vote on an option either 2-3 or 2-3-4.
So the other important thing that came out of the school committee was it was their first pass-through of the draft educational plan. And so at their meeting tomorrow night, they'll be looking to approve that to be included in the submission that we will be discussing and approving tonight. So with any minor updates that come out of that meeting, we'll fold that into the submission and then get it in at the end of the week.
We've gotten a few emails from folks with feedback on the grade configuration options too, which has been good. And I think that the meeting last week too, there was quite a group that had assembled here to for the school committee meeting, and so they were able to see the presentation as well, which I think there are many teachers in the audience, which I think is valuable for them to see what's coming down the pipeline as well. Potentially coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's clear we've kicked off the grade configuration discussion publicly in earnest at this point, so
Yes.
hopefully we'll continue to get feedback from the community, because obviously it's critical to the decisions that are going to be made in January. And again, that draft educational plan that we'll be looking for approval is just that. It's a draft educational plan, a step along the process, so far from the final one that we'll be submitting as far as part of this project, but what we need to be a part of the PDP. The select board meeting, there was a little bit of date confusion and changing, but we have been cordially invited to provide an update at the December 20th meeting of the select board. So we can talk about, offline who wants to participate, what we need to prepare. The ask from the town manager was simply a project update, because the board has not been as heavily connected to the process and wants to be brought along. Certainly with the PDP submission happening, it seems like a good inflection point to update the select board, and another opportunity to just, in a public forum, talk about the progress that we're making along the project.
What was the date again? I'm sorry.
20th.
Of December.
20th of December, yes. Yeah, 2 weeks from yesterday.
Okay.
Okay. We're just rolling through the agenda right now.
Those are always the easy ones up front. I'd like to get you guys momentum.
So the next is reviewing the cost range of options. Before we jump in, by the way, I just want to thank whoever put a different Elmwood picture on the slides, because
Anytime.
It's beautiful.
It's current.
So the next couple agenda items kind of run together, which I have up on the screen here, which is, before we jump into costs, I want to talk about the PDP itself. So the PDP is the Preliminary Design Program, and that's what we'll ultimately be looking to have you guys review and approve tonight. We're going to talk about the comparative cost exercise. We'll need to shortlist the options that get submitted as part of that PDP, and then ultimately get your approval to vote that through tonight. And then at the end, I'll talk about next steps for the 3 months ahead for the next milestone that comes after this. So this slide you've seen before, which is the Preliminary Design Program, is that it's really the first pass of the big picture items. It's a roll-up of everything that the design team and the OPM have presented and talked about over the last 4 months since you've had us as a team assembled here. There's an introduction and a narrative. There's the educational program, which we discussed, that has gone in front of the school committee, which is comprised of both of a narrative form and however many pages it is at this point, usually 50 some odd pages or so in length, and then a 2-page space summary, which is basically taking the idea of the grade enrollment with the 2 enrollments and splitting that up into physical containers, essentially. How many rooms do you need? What are the total room counts and total square footage counts? Evaluation of existing conditions were presented to you early on in the fall, so this is a roll-up of that. Site development, we also talked about early on. We've been talking and continue to talk about preliminary evaluation of alternatives since September, and tonight we'll be looking to make a recommendation on a short list. And then the local actions and approval, which is a letter that just documents how many public meetings that we've had since the outset, which is 14 building committee meetings and another 10 publicly posted meetings and a couple of community forums that we've presented at. And then a whole host of appendices, probably about 1,000 pages worth of all the documents that have been generated so far to date. So again, the PDP is a summary of all the work that you've done as a group, and that was sent out to you on Friday via Dan's email, and then updates were sent yesterday, and more additional information was also shared with you today. A lot of the PDP and the stuff that Dan sent out in the email versus what he sent out in the link are narratives, kind of breaking those large exhibits and appendices down to the digestible summary level, cliff notes, if you will, and allowing the MSBA to quickly get up to speed, and then they can dig into the details. So any questions on the PDP draft report, or any feedback or concerns or tweaks to that from a big picture standpoint? And now if there's wordsmithing, you can certainly email Dan and I. There's always wordsmithing to be done. So feel free to email us offline. But tonight, if there's any substantive changes or any substantive topics you want to talk about, we can discuss that as a group here. Okay. So after we go through tonight's topics, we'll be looking for your approval to move that submission forward, which is what the blue box says, and then submit it this Friday. Submitting it this Friday allows us to maintain our schedule, which allows us to submit the PSR by March 1st, or March 2nd, actually. If we don't submit by Friday, then it would bump out additional time. So we are maintaining our schedule, and we're ready. At this point, we've provided the information and feel that's an appropriate time to move forward.
And Jeff, so for those who are watching and may not be as familiar with acronyms, PSR is
Preferred schematic report.
preferred schematic.
Report.
I should know this too.
Here. So for those watching at home, preliminary design program is the PDP. The next stage is the PSR, so preferred schematic. That's the point at which you've selected the option. You've selected it for the size and location, and there's still time to develop the whole host of items that are listed on the right. So what we're looking to put in our rear view is the left side of this slide here, which is the things that I just covered on the table of contents. This will allow us to then move forward into the PSR stage, so preferred schematic, where the design team drills down on the short list of options. They do a more refined, instead of being cartoon drawings, you start to see some more defined drawings of what the building looks like. You're also going to see project-specific shaping of those options. Right now, we have a test fit, which looks like a three-legged stool, right, to make sure that you maintain the daylight per wings, and that just fits on the site. The design team will do custom designs based on the remaining options that survive tonight and tailor that. And we may have multiple options per site. So as an example of any of the sites, if we picked Elmwood or Hayden Row or East Main, we could still look at two options on that particular site if we wanted to look at variations of that. But we're looking to confirm which sites want to move forward tonight.
Jeff, when you say two options, do you mean the grade configuration, or two? What's two options mean?
Great question. So we would carry forward the two grade configurations no matter what, because that decision has not been made. But as an example, on a larger parcel like Hayden Row, which has both the benefit of the Irvine and Tadaro parcels abutting each other, you may look at two options on that site, even though we move it forward. Right now, we're calling that HR1 or HR2. We could have a 2A and a 2B, where one kind of, the gravity of that option shifts a little more to Marathon, and another one, the gravity of that option may shift further back onto the Tadaro site. So you can still look at two variations of that site as an example.
Potentially 4 variations for 2 to 4. Or
Yeah,
2 to
anything we
3.
do, would be multiplied times
Fine,
2.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Potentially. I mean, you may decide you're happy with a 2-3, but once you get larger, it gets a little more uncomfortable, and come back with another option at a 2-4. 2-3s tend to be a little easier to fit.
Got it. Thank you.
And thank you. I think it's good to sort of have this slide up as much as possible. I actually had 2 conversations this week about this project, and I talked about the PDP, and I remembered what it stood for, and the immediate questions I got were, so have we decided what we're doing yet? And I think sometimes the names can fool people into thinking we're a little further along in the process. This is really, as you said, actually I like the way you said it in our phone conversation earlier, which was this basically 500 pages of the last 4 months of our lives. It's a progress report,
Right.
and just basically showing the MSBA where we are in the process. It's less about hard decisions that have been made.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a summary of making sure we know what we want to build in terms of size, and understanding what we have available in terms of location. So it's really that level of the documentation. And then when you step into the PSR, it's the preferred schematic, right? You're gonna go through iterations of each of the options that survive and drill down. We'll have better cost information, we'll have better fine tuning of the site risks associated with each, and you'll get to a selected option. So coming out of the second stage, you are picking the location, size of the building that you want to move forward. And then when we get to the schematic design, you really do the detailed analysis. We're looking at, fine tuning the program, doing additional site investigation work, determining whether you want to hire a construction manager or go general contractor, determining all the sustainability goals of the project. You'll understand the reimbursement from the state at that point. We'll lock in a schedule. So all that detail work happens after you know what you want to build and how big it is. Then we really drill down as to what it's going to cost and when we can deliver it with finality. So what it's going to cost is always an important question, right? So that's our next topic. And so this was included in your packet. The backup was sent over the weekend, and then we got the second estimate yesterday, and I put the summary out there today. So the PDP level, the cost estimating, is relative cost estimating. So we're really looking at these 8 options here, which are comprised of 3 sites with a large and a small school, an ad reno at Elmwood, and then a code-based repair, are what we priced out. And so of these options, we had 2 cost estimators looking at it. They're looking at historical data of where the market trends are with dollars per square foot for a new build and dollars per square foot with renovations. They're taking the narratives that the design team puts together for the site requirements that are project specific and trying to earmark that with an overall site cost. And then adding contingencies to fill in all the gaps. And then we're also trying to use the crystal ball to project out by the time we bid this job in the end of 2024-ish, what would the market tell us that the cost of it is to build a building in terms of escalation. And that is a pressing topic for every project right now that's out to bid, and I'll give you a recap on that in a minute when I get through this. So the 2 estimates are not right on top of each other, and they shouldn't be a PDP because they're 2 different versions of what you think the building costs. They're 2 different independent eyes, and they provide kind of a range of where we think the cost might land. And so for those following at home from the numbers, for the smaller school, the pure construction cost kind of lands in the range of 90 to 100 million. And for the larger school, the pure construction cost ranges in the 115 to 130, maybe even 135 million for the larger school. And then the ad reno lands in the same range as the smaller schools, but actually a little bit higher, potentially up to 105 million, depending on how far you go with the code triggers there. And so we do need to look a little more granularly at the ad reno option, should that be the finality one. The other ones are easier to tell because you're building new build. The ad reno comes with the most amount of risk in terms of pricing it out at this stage level. At the bottom line, we add the soft cost multiplier. And so when we get to the PSR stage, I'll give you a whole detailed budget of what that's comprised of. But soft costs includes your consultant fees, your furniture, fixtures, equipment, your technology, testing and inspection, moving, legal, insurances, other admin costs, and contingencies. And so all that totals up to roughly about 30% on top of your construction costs. So I've taken a straight math here across the board of adding the 30%. It totals up that the soft costs ends up being 30 to 37 million, depending on the size school that we're talking about, that gets added on to the numbers above. And then we give a potential bottom line number, which in round terms puts the smaller school around 130 million plus or minus, and puts the larger school around 161, 64 million plus or minus. And now these are including the full sustainability goals of geothermal and a thermally efficient building that meets all the codes to get you to net zero. It does not include the photovoltaics. We're under the assumption that you may carry on the same PPA, which is a power purchase agreement. You could certainly still make the decision to put it into the overall construction projects, but we kept that as a clean side pocket at the moment and just looked at what it would cost to build the building itself to a sustainability standard. Over your next couple of meetings in December and January, we'll talk about sustainability and we'll get into the details of those costs and the cost drivers, and you can peel that back. So this is a kind of a conservative number. baking all that in except for the photovoltaics.
I have a question just
Sure.
on the two companies that are estimating. Have you worked with both of them in the past? Is that one of the reasons why they were chosen?
That's correct.
Okay. And why is it that AM seems to be 5 to 10, in one case 20% less in almost every case? Is there a reason why they're less? Is it?
So good question. Estimators don't like to be wrong, right? Because they like to set a number and come in under it. And I think, PM&C is being a little more conservative at this stage. And now we both use PM&C a lot. So we're very comfortable with both estimators. And we both actually use AM Fogarty a lot. So both firms are known to both of us and are two of the regular people in the market. Sidestepping your answer for a second to report the good side of the news is I had a meeting with the MSBA on Tuesday, and we are starting to see a little bit of favorability in the market in terms of bidding softening. It's not a recession, we're not coming down, but the estimating finally caught up to where the market was growing for the past year. There kept being busts, and every time we do an estimate, then the next one would bust, and the next one would bust, and people kind of got tired of yelling at the estimators, and so the estimators really readjusted. So they've ended to come up more conservative lately, and so lately, over the last 2 weeks or so, we've seen a softening. 2 jobs that Vertex bid, the filed sub-bid numbers, which are the subcontractors, not the general bidder, those came in 5% under the estimators' budgets. And on the MSBA call this week, they referenced 2 other projects where they also come in a few $1 million under on larger bid projects. So we are seeing favorable numbers, and I think AM Fogarty took some of that into accommodation because they're working on some of these projects, and so they didn't want to overshoot the market, and so there's on a little underside where PM&C was still on the conservative side because they're still at the cartoon level of a drawing versus the more refined.
Thank you.
I don't know, Dan, if you'd color that any differently. Or...
I'd say that Timothy AMF was 20% higher on my last one, so there's always this. They usually have some variation between the two of them, and it's not unusual between estimators to have a 5% or so differentiation between their numbers. That's within the range of what we would expect.
Right. And having the 2, it's to bounce off each other. And normally we would. That's another great qualifier. Normally, when we get the raw draft estimates, they're further apart like this. We did not reconcile these 2, which is we didn't sit down and compare and make one come up to the other or meet in the middle. When we get to the PSR stage, we will do that. We will sit down, we will de-scope, because right now you're arguing over, $50 a square foot versus 52. It's like, well, it's based on a couple of texts. It's not a design yet. So we don't do that at this stage, but we will do that at the PSR. You will see them much closer together than they are right now.
The other thing to look at is the fact that you're really considering these as relative costs. So it's one site relative to another site. And so the specifics that generated that number are less critical to this decision because it's based on such schematic information. But how the same metric applied to each site differs from one another is a data is a data point that's useful to consider when you're deciding whether one site should stay or one option should stay or be shelved.
So drilling down to that a little further, let's pick the 2-3 options across the board, which also includes the ad reno. So you see at the Elmwood site, the 2-3 option is around $125 million. Factors driving that is it's the smallest site. It has the least amount of land to accommodate. The Hayden Row is a slightly bigger site. There's a little more development to get deeper onto the site and some roadway connections onto to the Marathon School as well. So you see that tick up to $129 million. And then East Main, there's a lot more topography challenges there. So, and although similar in size to Hayden Row, you're also dealing with a lot of grade changes over there. And so, a couple more million at 131. And then over to the ad reno, you have the premium of the modulars. So you'd have to get kids out of the school. So you're seeing that relative cost at 134. So you're starting to see the uptick differences that you're paying a little more for Hayden Row or East Main versus Elmwood, but you're also getting more in terms of real estate and ball fields and things like that. So there is a relative cost nature to that. But the site challenges of East Main are more significant than Hayden Row in terms of the topography and the drivers there. There's also more risk associated with the East Main because we don't have data. We have data on Elmwood because we've done borings, both at the current project and previously when we looked at it as a potential location for Marathon. And we have data from the Marathon and the Elmwood at the Hayden Row site because we've investigated that and the town owns the property. We have not done any due diligence on the East Main site, so we do not know the prior uses of that. We don't know whether there's any soil issues there. We don't know where ledge is. So, that site particularly could tick up more than these other ones because there's more unknown factors there. We've carried the same contingencies across the board, but that one has more risk factors because we don't own it and we don't know what happened in the prior life of that site.
Is the cost of purchase in this as well?
Great question. It is not, so that should be added in there. We did talk about that, and I didn't have a number. And thank you for pointing that out, Tim, because we will need to add that in. I don't know if John, if you ever report back on.
So, Mike and I met with the town manager to discuss pretty much everything about that East Main Street site and conversations that need to occur to find out more information about willingness to sell, even consider selling, and price, etc., as well as any information about the site that we could gather from that. I have not heard anything back from the town manager. It doesn't seem like Mike has either. So
Yeah, I think it would be safe to put a placeholder of a few million in there or something that's appropriate. I believe the Marathon Irvine site was around 2.1.
$1.50.
It's $1.50, yeah. $1.50, and in today's dollars that's up even more. So maybe a round number like 2 million is an appropriate placeholder because it's a similar size acreage, but it's in current dollars. And we'll asterisk that.
What percentage of the soft cost is contingency? These numbers?
Great question. So we traditionally we carry 5% for the construction contingency, which would be change orders that you hit, and then 1% in soft costs, which is any other things that come up. So 6% in contingencies are carried in the soft cost multiplier. Any questions?
other questions about the cost estimates?
Does the MSBA contribute towards the purchase of property, or?
No, they do not. I think that's entirely a town cost that they would not participate in.
Yeah.
And site, another important thing, when we talked about it a few meetings ago, the MSBA caps. And site is when they cap out at the cost of the building footprint, essentially at 8%, the total value of it. So with any of the projects, the more site you develop, the more it ends up being a town cost versus an MSBA cost, and the ratio of it.
I don't think it's anything was being considered anyway, but I note the triple asterisk on here, the code repair option is not compliant with the educational plan. Accordingly, the MSBA would not provide reimbursement. So essentially that's not even an option for us from an MSBA perspective, also not from a logistical perspective, but.
Right, because their goal is that they want to participate in a program that solves the challenge you put forth in front of them, and that does not. That's meant as a benchmark for the citizens to understand, what that residual asset has in it, such a thing.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone at this table was considering that as a viable option, but I thought it was worth pointing out in public anyway.
The question comes up at town meetings when they see it. What about that one?
Yeah.
All right. We can always circle back to this. So, the charge here tonight is to vote a short list of options, both new construction and ad reno, to carry forward for further refinement and development in the next stage, and then for the building committee to vote to submit the preliminary design program. And then lastly, tomorrow night, the school committee is voting to approve the draft ed plan that they saw and that you've also seen at your last meetings respectively. And so that'll get inserted in there. That was also included in one of the iterations of the report. So you have a copy of that as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to do some talking if he wants. We have the options queued up here to go through the short listing. And then we can, when comfortable, we can get back and talk about the vote to move forward with the report itself.
Yeah, maybe before, Dan, if I could.
Sure.
So, obviously one of our actions here tonight is to choose the short list of options that is going to be moved forward as part of both the PDP and the further study that's going to be done by Perkins Eastman. So, the level of depth and detail that's going to be able to be achieved in the study that they're going to do is going to be largely driven by how many variables we give them. And so I think that from a committee's perspective, as we listen to Dan's update tonight, I think we've done a really good job of narrowing down from the original, whatever, 40 plots of land that were put there to these options that we have in front of us. But I think we really also want to give consideration individually and as a committee as to, are there options on there that we could never see actually being an option for this school? And if they aren't, this is probably the time to cut them off the list, because we do have, it's deadline driven, right? By February, we have to submit the PSR with the solution that we have. So the more options we give, the less, the sort of less overall time they have to devote to our options. So I just want to kind of give that context as we listen tonight. Let's make sure we're being really judicious and not doing the kick the can down the road. Let's wait and see a little bit more information. Yes?
It's my understanding that 2-4 won't work at Elmwood no matter what.
As an ad renter.
As an
As
ad
an ad
renter,
renter.
that's correct.
Right?
Yeah, as an
So
ad
can we
renter.
eliminate that one?
Well,
It doesn't exist.
As an
uh,
ad renter.
Because it proved in prior SBC meetings when we started to study it that it didn't work.
So it's
Only for
gone.
new.
2-4
Okay, it's gone
ed-
already.
2-4 ed reno is gone. If we're doing an ed reno,
It's a 2-3.
it can only be a 2-3. And again, more for the public than people at this table. The 2-3 ed reno has to stay on the list because the MSBA requires that we
Correct.
study an ed reno.
Okay.
John, if I could add.
Yes.
To your point about culling and being able to focus, and also to Jeff's point, remember that each option that moves forward will probably have multiple iterations, different ways to organize the building to meet the ed plan.
Are we talking about this now, or is this,
We're talking,
I
yeah.
mean, is this on the table right now?
So I think Dan's gonna go through some of the
Yes.
options updates, but if you wanna,
Well,
yeah.
okay, I'll
Go
wait,
ahead.
I'll wait.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the more I hear about East Main Street, we would have to purchase the property, we don't know the existing conditions. To me, that seems like no longer a viable option. If you're gonna add a couple $1 million on top of the already pretty hefty price tag that we're gonna be asking just to purchase the land, and we find out that the land isn't gonna even do what we need it to do, I feel like that nixes it for me.
I think there were also some pesticide issues
Yes.
in the nearby lot. There was
Potential,
a-
yeah.
Right,
it's already the highest cost option without all of the things you just mentioned.
right.
By only a few million, but it is.
Yeah, that's based on what limited knowledge we have
Right.
and not really been on it, but knowing that the topography is gonna be extremely challenging. We had the estimators carry a premium for moving a lot of soil around that site. That also presumes we can keep all that soil on that site.
And I think also it probably isn't the most efficient traffic scenario of all the things that we've seen. It doesn't solve a lot of the problems that maybe a different location would.
I think operationally that site is also a challenge in terms of buses, getting from one level to the next, to turn around to get students to school every day.
And piling on here. We talked about the site and the unknowns about it. One of the unknowns is if the owner has any interest or willingness to sell.
Exactly.
So,
That's a big one.
so unlike when, some of us went through this process, and it did with Marathon, and it did involve a land acquisition, we pretty quickly knew there was a willingness. We pretty quickly knew the price, and it met a lot of the other criteria. It seems like this one may not be fitting into those categories. Is there, I'm hearing, I think I've heard from a negative from every single voting member at the table here, so
Well, I'm just wondering, is there one more, not necessarily negative, but just factual? If we were to negotiate with them, is there a risk that could push the timetable back substantially?
Substantially, and that is a
That's
$1.
not insignificant.
Right, that is a
That's
$1
very
escalation,
significant, yeah.
fact too.
Just want to put that on the.
absolutely.
Another 40%.
Yeah, because realistically, if we negotiated, the town would have to secure the purchase, which would mean you'd be looking at probably May town meeting.
Yeah.
That we'd have to do that. We'd have a tremendous unknown where we really couldn't even be moving forward because we didn't own the site that we were working. So yes, I think it would have have to have a significant impact on the timeline. So, so I'll ask just the So Susan,
I would-
Tim, Ann, any additional thoughts you have with regards to that particular site?
I can't see it either.
I agree with what the committee is putting on the table.
Same.
I would vote for all the reasons Jeff's voice that we remove East Main Street from the possible sites.
I'll second that.
Okay. So should we do it that way, or should we wait?
We could do it, so we could just wait and do it at the end in terms of, ultimately what we need for you tonight is a recommendation of the options that move forward. And so you can just, by process of omission, take them off the table. Or you can do both votes. If you want to take that vote to
Yeah.
get it off the table and then do
Sure.
the vote the MSBA needs.
I think we've got sort of general consensus that one's going to be eliminated, but then maybe we'll do one. My own personal bias, I like to have fewer votes if we can. It's easier to kind of keep
I
track
mean,
of. And
Chris is taking the minutes
Yeah.
and we can
It'll come
record the
out the same way.
conversation.
it'll come out the same way, exactly.
About the same. Yep.
So we're withdrawing that motion for now.
But I think also, as you're doing the test fit options, you can probably skip over that
I'm
one.
going to skip over that.
Yeah.
Sure. So the test fit options, you're familiar with these, you've seen them before, but the one thing to note about these is that these are the options that we priced. So these are the configurations that were sent. There are other configurations where we have the building on the front of the Elm Street site where they're taking over the two properties adjacent to the Wood Street corner. None of those these are the ones that we put in front of the estimators so they could, calculate the lengths of pipe and where the building would be and the cutting required and all those information that went into creating the estimates that you've seen. So the Hayden Row site, we decided to put the building on the back part of it, thinking that would be like the most conservative spot that we could place it in. Probably one of the better spots that we may end up but of course we're gonna look at all of this site because all of it's on the table. And on the Elm Street site, the building really only fits on that wooded area and that across from that parking lot there. So those are the ones that we considered was that 2 to 3 on that parcel right next to the school existing.
And Dan, from an orientation perspective on Hayden Row, Marathon School is
Marathon's
at
right
the
up off
top.
the edge of that. Yep,
At the
right where the
top, where
orange
the-
bar ends.
Okay.
Yeah, but just to orientate everybody in the group, that Marathon is just off the page up here. This is 47 Hayden Row, coming onto the back part, the deeper part of the site. What Dan was saying, which you may not be able to read from over there, is this red dashed line is the existing Elmwood School here. And so it's building in that wooden knoll, tucked in between Wood Street and the Tennessee Gas and the building. So really shoehorning it in on that site. And then East Main with 135 on the front here.
And then the 14 Elm is but that's just the 14 Elm site.
Correct.
That does not include any additional
That's correct.
acquisitions.
No acquisition.
Yeah, so we did not study, so an important thing to note in the cost too, that we did not price out the one that would require adding 2 additional parcels. And it does come with those same purchase price, delay risks and
Yep.
things
Sure.
like those.
Let's try to keep them out.
Jeff, while you're still standing, maybe just show on that map where that gas easement runs through that property as well.
Yeah, so right here, yes. So you can see it bumped up against the building. And then these are the properties that we did not price procurement on.
So a question on 0 Hayden Row. Is that the only option on Hayden Row that we have at this point, or is there one more
There's
version?
one more.
There was one more.
I don't see-
We only priced this option, to Dan's point, that's why you also see the site cost a little higher on this one, so it's driving all the way to the back of the site and then developing that portion. We could still look at one that spans the 2 parcels or is tucked up in the front, which would have other development site costs. So that goes back to Bob's point about, we can look at a few iterations. So if 0 Hayden Row moves forward, there could be an option 1A, 1B, and 1C as we kind of place the building, because again, the 3-legged stool was the test fit. You could have L shapes or other geometries that tailor to the parcel more specifically from the ornament.
So I think you explained, well, why that versus having it up a little bit more north where it used to be? What are the advantages of having it way back?
There are, I believe this is the drier part of the site. I have to go back and look at that. I know, you see up here, this green here is actually, no, this one here, sorry, is wetlands. So there's wetlands up in this zone here.
Okay.
This was the drier part, I think, of the site. I don't recall what the properties along Blueberry Road extension are in terms of the overall wetness, but that's something we're gonna dial in on.
One of the other things was that there was some nice synergy about having space in between the two buildings for some kind of either, play or expansion or what, and in between them, rather than jamming them up against each other, and then not having any way to really work that other direction. So this was the one that we felt, just for pricing purposes, was the most conservative spot to put it in. We didn't want to put it somewhere else and then find out it was going to go all the way in the back and then have to add on to it.
No, thanks just for reminding, because we looked at a lot of different variations, and that all makes sense now that you've reviewed it, so thank you.
And so is that white dotted line that marks the lot there, so is that essentially the edge, the bottom one, is that essentially the edge of what we call the Todaro property?
It actually jumps down. You can see that line going. There's a piece that goes down a box that goes down into there, but that's an undevelopable lot.
But we're well into Todaro at that point.
Yes.
I just want to have a sense of like, when for people in town to understand that two properties, a really big plot of land, this particular design takes up kind of the rest of it.
But also, just to be clear, that area at the bottom does belong to the town, but it has a restriction on it, a conservation restriction. It can be used for recreational land. Now, if somewhere down the road the Board of Selectmen decide that the school playfields are recreational land, I suppose we could use that. But at this juncture, that was part of the Fair Heights subdivision 30 or 40 years ago. That land was set aside. Problem is, nobody can ever get to it.
Yeah.
Now that we own the Todaro land, then we have potentially access to it. The other thing about this, and the reason it's down there, is when the town purchased this property, we purchased a home from Todaro on Hayden Row Street, which will give us another means of access to the school, in addition to the big one we already have up at Marathon, potentially. So bus traffic, parent traffic, it could work out better for us having two means to access the school.
And in the context of the decision that we need to make tonight, that site offers a multitude of options that can be considered as part of the PSR process.
In the Elm Street option too, if we study this further, we will have that other connection to Wood Street as an option. We had that in a couple of other options, just not this particular one. But in all locations, we would want to have two means of egress and access to the site. It's optimal.
Just to follow up on Mike's question, so is that building now built, or that showing on that conservation restricted property, or is that?
No.
No, it's below that.
It's
That's
below
below
the
it.
dotted
it's
line?
above.
The line turns.
This is a different parcel. This is a separate parcel line. This is.
Oh, I got
This
it.
was
Right
a
in here.
Todaro. I think this was a different parcel. Mike, right?
There's a second parcel there.
This is the second parcel besides Todaro, and then this is the deed restricted one down here, which is kind of like a dog leg at the end.
Got it, okay.
Yeah. We show some like classroom, like natural pathways and classrooms, but nothing more than that in there.
That'd be great.
Great, okay.
Other questions about those test pits?
These are the 2.3s. There's the 2.4s
great.
as well.
2-4 is a
Very
essentially the
similar.
same orientation. Yeah.
Very similar. There's the bigger parking areas and the slightly larger buildings footprints. One thing about the 2.4 on the Elm Street site, as you can see, it starts to really get on top of the existing building that's there now. It's really pushing into right on top of, close to it.
And for the new so for the new constructions on Elm Street, you mentioned it's really pushing up against the building, but in theory, it doesn't affect the building during. It affects the building during construction, but are we talking about moving students during that construction, or?
I have built in my career buildings this close to other occupied buildings. It can be done.
You've answered my question.
It comes with trade-offs.
Yes, it's not
You have it.
ideal, but it can be done.
Yes.
We've
And what
excavated 2
happens
feet
to
away
the
from
old building when it's done? You crushed in and
It gets,
turned
it
into
gets,
a
it
parking
gets,
lot.
it gets crushed and turned into a parking lot and all the way.
Is that included in the cost?
Yes.
Thank you.
It has to go away to develop the parking.
The demo costs are included in any of the options that take place on
On
Elm program. We're not demolishing it under the ones that are off-site.
Yeah, correct.
But with this 2-4 option, are we not looking at potentially purchasing, understanding the delay and all of that, but from a choice standpoint, this does not include purchasing those 2 properties.
So there is no 2-4 option on the Elmwood property, right?
No.
This, it
There's
does
no
fit the
four.
new building
We've
fits.
said
The
that there's
new
not-
building,
oh.
okay.
This one goes
The
up
dude,
3
it does
floors, you know,
fit.
it's
It's just a
taller.
33-story building.
And that's buying the 2 properties.
And that,
to
this is
Bill's
not
point?
buying it, they're
This is
here.
not.
At one
We
point,
had other options that were on the
The field side.
field side of the
Yes.
gas line that could purchase those, and it did fit, but it was very tight.
Okay.
And comes with the added risk of, cost, timing,
Okay.
and schedule acceleration, so.
Yeah, the other thing to consider is those 2 properties have single-family homes on them. People actually live in them. Whereas the East Main Street side is vacant land. So it's a little bit harder to say, okay, we're gonna buy your house, kick you out.
Yeah.
Well, and,
Yeah.
and again, so I think
But
what
it's
I'm
an
hearing though
important
is that those are,
conversation.
the option of moving it, purchasing those parcels would only be on the table if we were to try to build on the other side of the gas line.
Correct.
And so even if we purchase those 2 properties and build on the other side of the gas line, it's still ridiculously tight.
If we do that, there was a slide previously, a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about the 2 to 4 bear doesn't really even fit. Because
Right, so the 2
It
to 4
actually
doesn't-
bites into the setbacks off of Wood Street.
Right, and so what we're looking at here doesn't involve the purchase of those properties
Mm-hmm.
because the more viable option of building on the Elmwood site is to build on the top side, for the 2 to 4 especially, is to build on the top side of that gas line, and that does not involve purchasing any additional property. So we can almost, I think,
The building is
We
just
can-
an additional floor.
right, we
Right.
can just basically take the discussion of purchasing those 2 properties off the table
Yes.
because the option is
I think
is
we
less
kind of proved
optimal
out
anyway.
that it doesn't, it's not going to gain you.
Yeah.
That's the point.
It's not going to
Yeah.
really gain any,
Yeah.
the 2-4 is not going to fit.
Literally, the only thing it would do is possibly do the new construction further away from the existing building, but
Yeah.
that's not.
Even with the gas line, I'm not
Yeah.
sure you would even, one of the things I think we'll find as we start to put plan options on this site is how tight it really is gonna be. Because we're gonna be limited to what will really, the geometries that are gonna be able to fit between that existing building with some kind of pathway, 20 or 25 feet around it, and then the new build. They're all gonna look compact like this, they're not gonna be spread out.
And you'd have to stage basically on the field, right?
You would have to split the parking for everybody who's coming, all staff, and they're gonna be on the field, and the contractors' trailers, and the staging areas. All of that'll have to happen on the, and that crane will probably be located in the courtyard of that building and be swinging around from there.
That will be
That'd be-
disruptive.
That's the only
That'll
way
be
it
totally
would-
fine.
Is
Yeah.
the cost?
Second and third
Is
graders
there
are
a cost
classically
to
really
the
well
swing
focused.
space built into that we saw earlier, the pricing we saw earlier? Is there a swing space option for this 14 Elm Street site? Like
As part of the cost. you
No.
as part of the cost? We
No,
didn't
because
factor
they
that
can
in
stay,
at all.
they could stay in the building during
That
that,
seems really
during that-
unrealistic.
that construction process.
Given how poor the traffic is currently, like thinking about students going to school there, arrival and dismissal,
Yeah.
and safety. Like we'd have to walk kids onto the street.
You'd have to bring them up into here, yep.
Yeah, that wow. I'm not quite sure how feasible that would be.
Mrs.
for
Cobb is
Mrs.
willing to figure that
Herbert.
out.
I mean, there's always the option to add the more relocatables or relocatables to it, but that increases the cost significantly to do so, and that they're not reimbursables.
Even in the ad rental, we assume we're only displacing half the school at a time.
We did,
At a
so we
cost
did,
of about
yep.
5.5 million, right, modular, just to put it in round numbers. If you did the whole school, you can double it, so it starts to, really grow, and then where do you put
Where do you
those
put all that?
modulars?
Yep.
It wouldn't fit on this site, it would have to be at an alternate location to have that kind of a village of modulars. Just a perspective here, you might not be able to read the faint lines, but what Dan was talking about is this is the 25-foot setback there, this thin dashed white line, not the thicker dashed property line. So that kind of defines your no-build zone. So these are your pinch points, that setback along here and then the gas line. And as far as the question on the other side, you can see the size of the project slides over. You know, it kind of widens out and fans out down here. So even though there's a little bit of a fan on Wood Street, like there's not a lot of gain by sliding it to the other side of the pipeline. So it will be challenging no matter where you land a building on the site for all the reasons that are said, but it is possible with trade-offs.
And just to be clear, we could consider, just want to make sure this option's on the table, we could consider that the Elmwood site could only support the 2-3 and not the 2-3-4 as part of today's discussion, and then you would move forward with just the Hayden Row site as a 2-3-4 option, if that was what the committee wanted to consider.
Because the 2-3-4 is so tight.
Well, it's
2-3 was
the decision we're going to make is what sites to pursue for 2-3 and what sites to pursue for 2-3-4. That's on the table this evening.
Where it gets tight
my
is
own
the pieces.
My own opinion, I think it's a great point. I just wonder, it goes a little bit against what I said at the beginning in terms of trying to focus the work of the designers, but part of me does wonder if we have to run this one to the ground a little bit more just to really lock in the argument of why this is not, why this won't work.
I agree. I think if we're not going to have the East Main Street site as an option anymore, then I do think it behooves us to explore two options that give us a 2-3-4 school. I think we've heard a lot about how the 2-3-4 configuration would be most beneficial to our programming and ease enrollment across several schools. It solves 80% of our problems. So I think having two 2-3-4 options is important. It's certainly not my favorite, but I think we should continue to explore it.
I think I agree, because traffic is one big question that's come up. And I don't know if you've landed on whether Hayden Row is preferable or Elm Street from a traffic perspective. Maybe Elm Street, I don't know. So I think that's a big question that needs to be run to ground.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely don't think we have landed on that. I think that there's more work to do from the traffic engineering perspective. So
One follow-up question I had in relation to that, for the cost for Hayden Row, one of the things that the traffic engineer said is that for the study that they've done, they've focused on the school and the immediate area around it. But there'll be further impacts upstream, so like there might have to be road improvements leading up to the school. Are those considered school costs, or where do we draw the line?
That's a great question.
From an MSBA perspective.
I mean, from an MSBA standpoint, they wouldn't want you pork barreling the project where you're really doing town infrastructure upgrades, and they use the word bundling as their version of pork barreling, but they say don't bundle town improvement projects with school projects. So you would have to justify what's there. Now, in the case of Marathon, as a simple example, we created a pocket lane, turning lane, that was justifiable in immediate proximity that could be improved. As part of that traffic study, it talked about issues that were pre-existing at Chestnut. And there was discussion of whether we did more at that intersection at that time. But the Marathon project was not the precipitating reason why Chestnut had issues, and the town subsequently added a traffic light there and changed those as part of a separate project because it got beyond that project solving the throughput needs on Hayden Row. So I think a similar would take, we would identify issues and identify how the project contributes or doesn't contribute to those issues, but we would kind of try and stay close to the site with the actual changes that we make to the public way.
And in our meeting with the town manager, he specifically asked to connect the engineers with other town departments so that we could be considering those wider impacts that are not able to be bundled into this school project, recognizing that there's going to be impact on Hayden Row almost end to end that might result from that. So I think what you'd likely see is probably a separate town meeting effort around traffic improvements to the road.
Yeah, the planning board at the 11th hour, after we've designed the school, selected the site, and we go through that process, which is 3 or 4 or 5 months. I forget where it was with Marathon. At the time with Marathon, the planning board had decided for one reason or another, they wanted sidewalks on both sides of Hayden Road Street. And the school should put them in. And, our guys came up with the thing that, this is a pre-K, K1 school. Kids aren't gonna be walking to school, we don't need sidewalks. But I fully expect that the sidewalk issue will come back around again with this school. There was a signalized intersection where Marathon came out to Hayden Road Street, and the planning board at the end of what seemed to be months of discussion said, okay, you don't need that, just put a guy out there to direct traffic. But I suspect we'll have more of that. It pretty much came out at the planning board level, which unfortunately is like towards the end of the project. But again, in speaking with Norman, the traffic thing at Hayden Road Street is, part of it, of course, due to the schools, part of it is just poor design. And some of it's on the town as opposed to the schools. So I suspect we'll work it out at some point. But they'll ask for all kinds of crazy stuff, and
To that point, cost-wise too, we can carry an allowance budget for off-site mitigation, or if it comes to it, we can carry the cost of a traffic light and then not execute if it's not necessary.
I forget the number, but we worked with the neighbors that were most directly affected by the entrance and exit from the school, and there was plantings and fences and bushes, and we did all that to take care of the neighbors' concerns. The planning board is big on that kind of thing too, because they have the planning board, and so it's an interesting part of the process.
So just to follow up on your conversation, at what point does the planning board get involved in this project?
At the end,
At the very end, okay.
before construction, we've got the plans, we've got the designs, the landscape architect has done most of his stuff. Then all the engineering, the water, the stormwater designs, all that is submitted to the planning board. The planning board hires an engineering firm to look at all that. The engineering firm comes up with questions, the planning board sends them back to our guys. Our guys come up with solutions, and then 3 or 4 months later, the planning board is okay, the site plan is approved. It's not a special permit process, it's a site plan process, a little bit different, but it's public, and it's a big nickel item, and there's a lot of interest at the planning board level. But the other part that I picked up when I was doing the PDP is heights of buildings in Hopkins are limited, residential to 40 feet. Commercial or everything other than residential is only 35 feet. And so I suspect that if we do the 3-story option, we'd have to go to the Board of Appeals to get a variance. I don't think we'd have a problem getting that, given the use, but it's something we have to keep in our mind, that I don't think you can get a 3-story building under 35 feet.
Do we need to go to the Board of Appeals, or
No.
is it covered by the
Dover amendment.
Dover Amendment?
No, height and parking are all part of the things that towns can control. The Dover
Okay.
Amendment doesn't cover it. Height is one of them. And so you'd have to get a variance for height. The only difference is at Marathon, and all those air conditioning units on top of the building.
Yeah.
The planning board wanted screening, so you couldn't see the air conditioning units, all you saw was the screening. And somebody from the building department wrote a letter opining that the Dover Amendment is set up so that we can afford to buy books, not screening for the air conditioning units. So you look at Marathon today, there is no screening, and they're no more ugly than the screening would be. And I'll do the same thing for this one. But that's the kind of thing that the Dover does exempt you from.
Right.
Put the height requirement, okay. Right.
And all
Mike,
the-
can I,
I was
sorry.
gonna say, all things Mike said all happens post-funding. So we'll do courtesy meetings. We've already
Yes.
done one meeting with the town planner and some of the planning department. We'll do another after the selected option, to make sure we understand what they think the challenges are. But whenever you get in front of any of these permitting boards, there's changeover on those boards, there's points of view that come in after the fact that you've got to address.
There's 9 members, all of them have an opinion, and it's just, it's fun.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the timing of keeping them up to date, so thank
Yeah,
you.
so we've been pretty successful with our smaller projects. That's kind of what we've adopted, is doing what Jeff just suggested, is meeting with our principal planner, our building department, our public safety and all that stuff, with our initial set of plans to see if they have any concerns as we're kind of going through, so they can make the recommendations if there's parking issues, lighting issues, that type of thing. Then these guys can capture that and if it makes sense, and move forward with that, rather than doing a complete set of plans and then going and then, having everything kind of X'd out. There are some things that need to change throughout it, but we have found success with that pre-meetings with them to make sure we're covering all, or at least some of their bases.
And we did have that initial meeting when we were looking at what sites we were considering in town,
Yeah.
so that we could just keep them apprised of the types of discussions that we're already having at an appropriate level for where we are now.
Yeah, if we can just talk about the marathon, and Jeff and Mike, you'll remember this, and maybe John, I think when they designed the driveway for the marathon school, it was designed to be able to pick up another school, and I think we also brought utilities up through a portion of that as well.
The utilities were brought up to the intersection, as I recall. Again, that was the plan,
Yeah,
up where the driveway splits to the left.
splits to the left, right, yeah.
So we didn't have to go out to the street.
If we were to add another
But
building.
with this school way down to the right, it may be
Maybe.
cheaper to just
Cheaper to
go.
go right back to the
Go
street
right back to
again.
the street, right.
But that's the kind of thing we'll figure out as we
Yeah.
further refine
Yeah.
the options.
And the other options were the ad reno.
The 3 ad renos, yep.
Yep.
So we have the maximum reuse, which I believe only keeps the gymnasium.
No,
No, it's the other way around, that's the
Is
minimum.
the other way around? That's the minimum reuse.
Yes. The one all the way on the right, the minimum reuse was just
Just
keeping
to-
the
just
gym
keep
and
the
a
gym.
portion of the existing
Oh,
building that was close to it. And then the one all the way on the left was the maximum reuse, so that was trying to maintain as much as the building as possible and doing that.
It's really a classroom wing that sticks out the back there. That adds some of the necessary classrooms, and a lot of work is, the CAF is added at the back behind the existing gymnasium, so that whole area is redone, but the rest of the bar building and the existing CAF and library, media center, and that other classroom wing are now largely remain intact in that option.
What's our requirement from a PDP perspective in terms, I know we need to have an ad reno option. Are we picking one or multiple of these?
One, yeah, so the
One, right,
You
okay.
need one.
The PDP, just to refresh everybody's memory, is you have to carry an ad reno, the code repair, and one new construction, that's the minimum.
Mhm.
You can carry multiple ad renos, multiple new constructions, and in our case, there's 2 grade configurations, so we're defaulting to double when it comes to the new construction. The ad reno won't handle the larger grade configuration.
Okay, so we don't
The
need,
MSBA in the past, when you submit the PDP, if they don't feel you put enough options on the table, they'll generate other options for you to come back with. That's less of an issue now because people are doing great configuration. There's a lot of other turnaround of sites, but they want to make sure that you're giving it its due justice and looking at multiple options so you're not going with a predetermined solution.
Sure.
They'll comment on it and say, well, like, hey, bro, what did you think about putting it here? Or did you think about putting it there? Or what if you did this? Like, we will have that level of conversation with them. But the answer is we only need one ad reno. And I think, from the consultant standpoint, I don't think the minimum reuse of just the gym is a viable option. And I think, the maximum reuse doesn't really solve most of what you need. So from our standpoint, Perkins and Vertex think the moderate reuse makes the most sense for the ad reno to move forward. And that's replacing the end of the building here with a wing in the back and doing an addition off the gym and repurposing. So there's still a lot of additions going on that ad reno, and it would be a long phase project.
And that is the one that was priced for the pricing for the PDP is the moderate.
and what did we designate? So we've got codes on all of them? Like AR what?
Yeah, we need to go over
This
that.
is AR-1.
So,
Moderate is AR-1.
yeah, moderate's AR-1. We apologize for not having the key.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure when we get further in, I know what I'm putting in motions. Okay.
So those are the 9 options essentially, the 2 configurations per grade enrollment, and then the 3 ad renos. We think the AR1, which is the center one, is the likely candidate that makes sense for you as an ad reno.
What do you anticipate the moderate reno? You've just hinted that it's a long process. Is it twice the time that it would be to build new construction, or?
No.
At least
another-
50% more,
50,
probably.
another
Yeah,
year.
so I mean, in simple terms, the new construction is 2 years, right? The slightly bigger school, a couple more months maybe.
Yep.
The ad reno would be 3 years, because you're constantly moving around. And that's directly tied to how many modulars you can fit on the site and buy. The more we can displace, the faster we can do it. But you're also dealing with construction laydown area, parent pickup and drop off, leaving some place for the kids to play, and having that modular village. So the ad reno, even more so than the new option at Elmwood, has a lot packed in there for that intensive use of the site.
Usually you need to try to capitalize as much as you can on the summers. So you usually can't. Usually you need more summers in order to get one of these done.
Other questions on ad renos?
Ad renos tend to be the one with the most cost creep too, for obvious reasons. We're looking at this at a high level. We haven't peeled walls back to see can we separate the building where we want to tie in right now. We may have to move that line and take more out or leave more in.
Is it even feasible to put modulars on that location? Like, you'd have to essentially take the kids off site, wouldn't you?
I mean, anything's feasible.
Anything can be.
I mean, there's enough space there. There's
Yeah.
enough space there to put
you know-
enough modulars to hold
Yeah, we
600 kids.
No, we only anticipated for this one to 6 classrooms, 6 to 7 classrooms.
16.
16 is what you have
16,
in.
yeah.
So it's like half the
Half the
population.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it would flood that whole ball field area, and we would, as part of this option, it would be your future parking. You would take down the trees between Wood and the building, and that becomes, lay down area,
Part of
access,
construction area, yeah.
and then
Yeah.
parent pickup and drop off's got to go somewhere. But we'd have to fine tune it and see, can we fit 16? We didn't do the study. I mean, there are places in Boston where you can stack modulars too. I mean, you have them there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can build 2-story modulars. It comes with a cost.
Yeah.
So
And does that, I'm sorry if this sounds silly, but does that mean some students are in one part of the property in a stacked modular while half the school is still in the school?
that's correct. Yeah, we would essentially split the school in half. Like, one side we would concentrate the students, and then renovate the other side and do the additions, and then kind of move you over. So there'd be a period of time where you would not have gym, because you would not have a gym available to you. So you would have outdoor play. Some other schools we've added extra modulars to be basically a double wide space, but you've got a regular floor-to-floor ceiling, so it's really a running around space, not a full workout kind of space.
And there's some kind of a traffic pattern for staff and kids to get from one building to the next?
We would need to lay it out, I mean, this shows the finished product here in the image, but we would certainly have to lay out where do the modulars go, and what utilities do we need to bring to the modulars, what safe zone do we need to clear out snow around the modulars. So there's a whole host
And
of
technology, how does
right.
that all fit in?
Right, they would need all kinds of temporary connections for all that. So the
And a nurse. A place to put a nurse. And where's the secretary? I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
No, they're great questions. I mean, and we would assume that you're not duplicating staff. So whatever staff you have today still serves both satellite schools, right? Because they're on the same parcel. You're just walking back and forth. But to your point, at some point, the admin needs to get out of the existing school and go to the modulars and the nursing staff, so you can renovate those portions of the building and then flip-flop. So it wouldn't just be classrooms in the modulars, to your point.
I mean, let's be honest, right? You can't fit a 2, 3, 4 in an ed reno. Everything you just described is a nightmare. And
These are no fun.
what the school, obviously decisions have not been made yet, but like I'm hard pressed to believe that if we didn't have to have an ad reno, that this committee would be voting to move an ad reno forward. So it seems to be the least flexibility, the most disruption,
And
all of those
expensive.
things, and it's
very
really
expensive.
expensive. So
No benefit.
I actually sort of hope that none of Mrs. Carver's questions ever get answered, because we pretty quickly figure out that this is not something that is viable. I mean, our committee is tasked with finding a solution to this problem. This seems like a lot more problems.
That's an excellent observation that is common in just about every town that considers doing a project such as this. And one of the reasons that the MSBA requires it anyway is because you are all engaged in the solution right now. And so those questions are obvious to you. But there's a certain portion of the town who will ask the question of, we have a resource. Why can't we just use that resource? And so answering or understanding the challenges that are posed by those questions creates the convincing argument that some of those voters may need in order to support what could be a costly new construction that doesn't make use of an existing resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the MSBA will see that. They
Oh, yeah,
they just
absolutely.
require it.
Yeah.
Because they know that if we do the ad reno thing, where are we ever gonna add to it again? I mean, at least with the other options we have, there's potential to make the schools bigger, or even add another whole school.
Yeah.
But here, you're kind of limited. I had a question though, with Center School, the MSBA was very specific and said you can never use that facility for educational purposes again, flat out. Do you recall that, Jeff?
The nuances are a little different. I mean, they would allow you to use it for swing space. So,
Do you think they would?
yeah, I think they would. They wouldn't force you to not use an asset you have for the sake of
Because
doing
they
it.
were
Their
like,
intent is that they don't want to pay for a new facility
Yeah.
for you to
And
get
then-
the new facility and then just go back
I
and
guess
use
that's
the
what I was
original
getting
one
at.
because you're,
I guess that's what I was getting at with Elmwood. If, say, for example, we built a new school on Hayden Row Street, and of course the Elmwood School became excess property, would the MSBA require us to take it down, or we just turn it over to Norman and
they won't require you to take it down. And I
puts the
think,
town hall down there?
I think Hopkinton's situation, they're more forgiving, right? Because they write those things in there because they want towns that are reducing in population to not just close schools to then reopen them. You
Yeah.
guys are on the opposite
Yeah,
side of that
yeah.
coin where you're only reopening them because it's an absolute must. And I think they'd be sympathetic to that. They write those rules for towns that are shrinking temporarily and then growing back up. That's why they wrote some of that language in there. But I think they're open to the conversation in your guys' case. The last point on the ad reno is we see lots of ad renos at high school, middle schools, right? Because those are traditionally much larger facilities built up over the years. There's wings that are worth keeping. There may be historical value to them. When you do an elementary school, it's really one shoot and match, and those tend to be all new unless there's historical context that needs to be preserved. And where you guys are growing, it doesn't make sense. If you were shrinking, then an ad reno may have some more value. But
Well, and I would think in a high school property, those are big kids that can move from one building to another. But I was just picturing, where's the cafeteria? And how do we get 7 classrooms of 7-year-olds from one of those buildings to the other in February to eat lunch? Like, I think that's a simple picture that should discourage that
no, it
plan.
should. I mean, it ends up back in the start of COVID where everybody ate in their classroom at their desk, like unfortunately
Eat in
for
the
a year,
classroom.
right?
Just like the old days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
These are the challenges that, they're the trade-offs. for
Yeah.
sure.
Bag lunches for everybody.
So, this has been a great discussion. But ultimately, we'll look for your guidance on what the committee wants to move forward with the shortlisted options.
Okay. So that's the point we're at now.
We can continue to talk about it and discuss and debate though.
Okay. So, so Norman, just to quickly bring you up to speed, which you'll probably appreciate the timing of this a little bit, but, you already brought them up to speed. Okay, so yes, so the committee is basically taking East Main off of the list of considered options. So what we really need to do as a committee is decide of the remaining options. So we've got a new building on existing Elmwood. We've got new building on Hayden Row. I think, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong for any reason, in both of those cases where 2-3 and 2-3-4 are options, we're obligated to carry both of those forward because we don't know what the project, we have not been directed yet as to what the project will be between a 2-3 and a 2-3-4. And then we have to pick one of the ad reno options. We can pick more than one, but we have to pick at least one of the ad reno options, and the consultant recommendation has been for the moderate reuse. Moderate air one.
The middle one.
Yeah.
So are we, and what we don't need to decide specific to the Hayden Row property is any sense of where the building goes on that property. We just need to move forward exploring that property. So of the Hayden Row 2-3 and 2-3-4, of the existing Elmwood new construction 2-3 and 2-3-4, are there any concerns about moving forward with any of those 4 options I just listed? Okay. From an ad reno perspective, consultant recommendation is for moderate reuse. Does anyone want to do anything different other than move forward with just that one? No. Nobody likes just the gym option? Okay. So I'm going to put, so if that's the case, then what we need is a motion to approve the following options to be included in the preliminary design program for further analysis. The 5 options to pursue, 6, forgot the other one we're required to do. The 6 options to pursue include a code upgrade of the existing school, option AR1, which is the moderate reuse addition renovation of the existing school, new construction options at the existing Elmwood Elementary site that we've designated as EE1 and EE2, the 2-3 and the 2-3-4 respectively, and new construction options at the Hayden Row site we've designated HR1 and HR2, a 2-3 school and a 2-3-4 school respectively.
Can I ask one question before we get that motion on the floor?
Yes.
Is there a cost associated with the number of options we put forward? And how does that impact? No, just in general to the project. I mean, if you're only moving forward and thinking about planning for, say, 3 options, is that less expensive than if we're moving forward and thinking about, well, how many we have now? 5? 6. And with respect for 2 of them are pretty much off the table.
Required.
Yeah, they're required. No, there's no added, doesn't affect it at all?
You make Dan a little more work. But,
Yeah, it's a little more work, but no,
It's essentially, with the number we're talking about here.
It's not gonna matter.
Like
Okay.
if you wanted to carry 10 forward, versus 4 forward, then there's a different amount of work. We
Right.
would just need to talk about the time frame of getting those all developed in line and still back in front of you within the time frame.
Okay.
But the number of options we're talking about here works within
5
the
is,
time frame.
okay.
It's not an unusual amount.
Okay.
There's usually more than one.
Okay.
And the expectation would be that once we get into late January, we are taking half of those off the table.
Right.
Okay, so it's only there for a month anyway, essentially. Okay.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, motion by Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Tiffany. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then it is unanimous and passes 6-0.
Just so that I record this properly, do we have a letter designation for the base repair option?
BR.
And base repair and code upgrade are one and the same.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're not going to develop that one any further. The base repair is essentially developed.
Yeah. Okay. So we're there on options, so that's good.
We're there on options, so then that goes back to the PDP itself. And we know the school committee is going to complete their work with the ed plan tomorrow night, but you guys have already seen it. We've discussed it at our last meeting. If there are no other questions on the PDP, we'd look for an approval from the committee to submit that on Friday and reserve our timeline to work with the MSBA.
Okay. So I'll open up for any other questions with respect to the PDP. And then I'll do the motion language just when I confer. Are there any other questions or concerns with the PDP as drafted? So hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the owner's project manager to submit to the MSBA the preliminary design program dated December 9th, 2022, with any minor wordsmithing type corrections recommended by the ESBC, the chair of the project team.
So moved.
Okay, motion by
Second.
Tiffany, second by Mike. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, then it is unanimous, 6-0.
Okay, so where we go from here,
I like the animation.
yeah.
Nice little addition.
I've been watching too many of my PowerPoints.
It's good. Late in the meeting, you just kind of woke us up with the animation. I like that.
So we're back here, we're at the first third of the project. Current stage is ready to submit the PDP now on by December 9th. Had 3 community forums, 4 if you count the original kickoff meeting we've had, and entering in the PSR stage. Big picture zoom out, we're looking to get to a town meeting in the fall of 2023 and then kick off into design and get into construction at the start of 2025. And that's the current path that we're on. We looked at this slide a little earlier, which is now shifting over to that middle column of we're going to do a final evaluation of alternatives. You'll see a deeper dive. We'll do a little more on the groundwork on site. Grade reconfiguration decision will be discussed. We'll do a more deeper dive on cost estimates, and we'll actually review those with you and reconcile them. Sustainability goals is an important topic because that's a cost driver, and so we want to talk to you about that and what the aspirations are of the committee. And then everything on the right is really the granular work that happens after you select your preferred grade configuration and location. So the next 2 slides talk about the meetings that take place over the next 3 months. This is the critical part of the project where you pick your option and then it goes back in front of some of the other boards to concur. So just kind of reading down the list, we're here tonight at the top with the vote you just took. And then the school committees tomorrow night will submit on Friday. We have another meeting with you guys next Tuesday night. We're going to start to talk about the sustainability and the MEP mechanical designs of the building to get more into the guts of the project. At some point we'll hear back from the MSBA with their comments on the PDP, where they will critique and comment on what we've submitted, and if there may be some adjustments to the ed plan, to the options. We'll hear their feedback and bring it back to you. We're all going to have a blessed holiday break, and then we'll get back together on January 3rd, fresh as roses, to tackle this. And quickly thereafter, we get to the school committee on Thursday the 5th, and they have 3 subsequent meetings, weeks in a row, where they're going to review and deliberate the grade configuration. We've talked about adding a daytime community forum at the senior center. We're trying to reach out to a different demographic versus our evening meetings. Your work does not end. We're meeting again on January 17th with this group to continue to go through the refined options. I had targeted a select board update in January, February, but I heard tonight that we're going to do that earlier. There may be another one here too, so we'll just leave that as a placeholder. But we'll bump that up for December. Community forum on the 24th. This assumes that we'll have a community forum either way, but it assumes that the school committee has made their decision on grade configuration, and we can report that out, as well as their more refined options to the community. And then you'll get together again on January 31st to grind through the analysis, and we'll look at that matrix that we established, kind of starting to really look at how these remaining 5 options compare against the criteria that you established this past fall. Hopefully everything goes according to plan, and by the February 13th, you're able to make your recommendation of what your preferred option is. From there, we go back in front of the school committee for them to have an endorsement support vote. for the work of this committee, what you want to move forward. Right now, we have earmarked another meeting over the school vacation, which we can confirm as that approaches, and then get back in front of the select board for their endorsement support vote the end of February, and then having you take a review of the PSR submission by the end of February, targeted for the 1st, and then we would submit by the 2nd to the MSBA, which is a deadline of theirs. So we work backwards from that March 2nd deadline. So we've laid out a good process here. This is certainly achievable. Lots of robust discussions need to occur between now and then, and I think we've set a good pace for this committee and the other committee, being the school committee, to do their respective work in that time frame. Any questions?
Could you elaborate on the matrix that you just mentioned that we'll be reviewing in January? Is it the traffic light format?
Correct, yes.
For each criteria, or?
Yep, great question, Drew. So we as a group have talked about the criteria. So there was about 14 items or so we established that we thought would be important. We'll refresh that just to see if there's anything else that's changed through the community forums or through your discussion that you think other things have risen to the top. And sometimes things fall away, that they become neutral on all of them and may not be relevant to the final deliberation based on the sites. So we kind of put that across the left side, and then we'll list the options across the top. It's meant to be a working tool for each of you, right, to gather your own thoughts, to help you have an informed discussion. As we talked about, we use the traffic light approach because it's not a numerical score. Ultimately, the one that grades slightly higher might not be the best solution because of where it landed, but you're looking for the one that has the most green, the most positives related to it, not super high positive in one category and mediocre in others. So it's meant to be a working tool for you guys. Did I answer your question?
It does, yes.
Other questions on the timeline that was outlined? You know, if I could try to highlight it for community members, just to pull out the big things. From a building committee perspective, in the short term, we're going to be really diving into sustainability and a lot of the decisions that we'll make in terms of what we're looking for from a sustainability and a mechanical and HVAC type perspective over the next few meetings. The other topic that everyone, if you haven't heard it enough already, should really be plugging into is the grade configuration discussion that will be occurring throughout the rest of December and January with the school committee. Those are kind of the largest things that are going to happen over the next month that the public would want to connect themselves to. Is that fair?
Yep.
Okay.
That was everything on our agenda.
I think that is everything on our agenda.
Bob or Dan, did I miss anything?
Nope. Okay. Well, anyone else have anything we want to cover? Then if not, I will happily seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mike, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Then we are adjourned at 7:32. Thank you, HCAM, for broadcasting, and thanks everyone who tuned in. And we will see you again next Tuesday, December 13th, right back here. Thank you.
One, two, three, four.